That very evening, right in the middle of the Red Rock Alzheimer's Center's fundraising gala, before I even had the chance to step on stage, my daughter-in-law, who had never visited my wife even once while she was sick before she passed, but stood in the center of the room, raised her glass, and said loudly enough for 100 people to hear, "He's confused, just waiting for the day he signs the house over to us." A moment stretched long like a blade to the throat. The eyes of doctors, lawyers, patients, donors, all fixed on me as if they were watching a cheap play. I saw clearly a few of her colleagues smirking, thinking this was the fun opening act of my family. They didn't know what humiliation smells like until I switched the mic on and spoke. If your own family has ever made you a joke in front of others, leave a period. And if you'd like me to share the full story of this justice, I'd appreciate a subscription. I truly value it, and I kindly ask for your permission to tell my story. Afternoon in Sedona has a silence all its own, a silence mixed with the wind scraping across desert stone and the red sun bleeding down the mountain's feet. From the wooden porch of my house, the scorched earth color reflected onto every window pane, bathing the whole space in a muted rose like the breath of a dying day. 3 months since Eleanor passed, I still hadn't grown used to the emptiness beside me. The chair she loved still sat by the window, the blue wool scarf folded neatly on the armrest, as if it had been set down just last night. I chose to live slowly, tending the cactus garden Eleanor cherished, brewing a pot of mint tea, playing the piece of music she listened to every evening. No one disturbed me. No one called. The piece was so fragile that a single loud sound could shatter it. Around 4:30, that sound truly came. A car door slammed, and a sharp voice sliced through even the wind. I recognized it instantly, Victoria Hale's voice. Just seconds later, Lucas's voice followed, tense and strained. I stood, quietly set my teacup on the table. A thread of unease ran down my spine, the kind of instinct a firefighter of 30 years doesn't easily lose. They walked in without waiting for an invitation. Victoria led, carrying a glossy black leather bag, the kind attorneys bring when they're ready to take someone apart. Lucas trailed behind, hesitant, avoiding my eyes. Behind them was a man I had never seen, tall, gaunt, wearing a badge reading Elder Law Attorney. The presence of all three in my red house, where Eleanor's shampoo still lingered on the pillow, made the air so thick it was hard to breathe. Victoria set the bag on the table and pulled out a chair as if everything had belonged to her for years. Her voice was so cold that metal would envy it. "Henry," she said, pressing each word, "we're here to finalize the paperwork. You signed the documents for temporary guardianship and authority over your assets. This is to ensure your own safety." I looked straight into her eyes. No reaction, no expression. Just watching the way Victoria's freshly painted lips curved the way people do when they're about to teach someone a lesson. Lucas was different. He didn't look at me but at the wooden table, the table where I had set breakfast for 18 years for my only son. His hand trembled slightly. I saw both hesitation and guilt hiding behind the shine of his wedding ring. "Dad," Lucas began, "we discussed this thoroughly. We're worried about your mental health." Victoria consulted 2 doctors. "They think prolonged grief might affect your decision-making ability." I heard it clearly, every word, but what sent a chill down my spine wasn't Lucas's voice. It was the way Victoria's eyes were fixed on me like someone observing an incapacitated patient. "Your grief is affecting your executive function, Henry. Lucas consulted 2 specialists already. Transferring authority is necessary." Victoria spoke without a hint of hesitation, as if she had rehearsed that line dozens of times in front of a mirror. I didn't argue. Never. In the final years caring for Eleanor, I learned one thing. Sometimes silence is the sharpest shield. I stood, walked to the wooden shelf by the door where I kept my phone. While pretending to check the time, my fingers slid and turned on the recording mode. This was Arizona. One-party consent was enough. Victoria had clearly forgotten that. back at the table. Lucas looked at me, desperate like a child trying to explain someone else's wrongdoing. Victoria shifted her weight, fingers interlaced, ready to strike at any moment. She pulled a stack of documents from her bag and pushed them toward me, as if handing debt papers to a delinquent. You just need to sign here, here, and here. Then Lucas will temporarily manage the assets, including this $3.4 million house. Everything is legal. No one wants things to get out of control. I looked at the words, guardianship petition, temporary. The bold black letters felt like a fracture between two generations. I lifted my head steady. Victoria, I said, my voice low but clear, you and your husband will leave my house. Both Lucas and the elder law attorney froze. Victoria didn't. She let out a small laugh, a half-smile edged with mockery. Henry, you're proving exactly what we're worried about. This stubbornness only shows you're no longer thinking clearly. I didn't respond. I just stood still, eyes locked on Lucas. Son, I said slowly, I will say this once. I won't sign. I won't hand over the house, and I won't give my life to anyone. Lucas opened his mouth to speak, but Victoria cut him off with a glance sharp as a blade. Fine, she said, gathering the documents. If you won't cooperate, we'll proceed formally, and then everything will be out of your control. She stood, straightened her jacket, as she had just concluded a successful negotiation. The elder law attorney bowed out of courtesy. Lucas didn't dare look at me as he walked to the door. The engine started outside, ripping through an air that had long been cracked. When the sound faded down the red dirt road, the house sank into a silence so heavy it hurt. I locked the door and walked slowly toward Eleanor's room. The afternoon light spilled through the window across her bed. The white sheets I still changed every week, an old habit I couldn't let go of. On the nightstand, the silver ring Eleanor wore on our wedding day rested in a wooden box. I opened it, lifted the ring. Cool, steady, just like the woman who walked with me through 4 decades. I whispered, my voice like a vow. Eleanor, they've chosen to stand against me. That night, after Lucas and Victoria left, I sat for a long time in the small kitchen. The warm yellow light hanging from the ceiling cast a soft glow over the wooden table where Eleanor used to sit and pick beans every afternoon. My mind ran back to 9 years earlier, the moment when everything started to crack, and also when I was forced to begin recording every detail, like someone archiving memories before they were wiped clean. I remembered exactly the day we received the results at Mayo Clinic, Phoenix. The neurologist placed a thick file on the table, graphs in blue and purple stretching out like a silent warning. Eleanor sat beside me, hand in hand, trying to stay calm. When the doctor said early-stage Alzheimer's, her eyes lit with a fear she couldn't hide. It was an afternoon so hot the air seemed to stop, but my heart turned cold. Lucas was there that day. He was a third-year resident. The moment he stepped into the room, Lucas hugged his mother, reassuring her with a slightly trembling voice. I still remember him saying, Mom, don't worry, I'll come visit often. That small hope, unfortunately, lasted only 2 weeks. He came by twice after that. Once she brought pastries from the bakery she loved, and once she took her for a walk around the yard, but exactly twice. From the 3rd month onward, the distance stretched into a gulf. I didn't understand what had happened until I saw the first email from Victoria in the family inbox. Distance is healthier. My therapist confirmed emotional detachment is essential. The words were as cold as a blade. Victoria sent it to Lucas, but I received it because he still used our old shared email from med school. The caregiver trauma theory wasn't entirely wrong, but the way Victoria twisted it, bending each point to turn it into a justification for avoidance, that was the real cruelty. From that day on, Lucas faded from our lives like a shadow carried off by the wind. Eleanor asked me countless times during the months she still had clarity, Henry, where's our son? Why hasn't he come home? Every question felt like claws across my heart. I always gave the same answer: "He's on call, sweetheart." Even though I knew sometimes people aren't busy, they simply choose not to show up. When Eleanor's illness entered the moderate stage, I began to realize I couldn't rely solely on memory or emotion. Some things needed to be written down, every period, every stretch of time, so that one day if someone asked, "Oh, do you have proof?" I could lay everything on the table without my hands shaking. I took a leather notebook and wrote on the first page, "Eleanor, timeline." From that day on, everything was recorded carefully. The number of hours she slept, each time she forgot someone's name, medications prescribed, which therapy sessions worked, and most importantly, every effort to reach Lucas. Every call I logged, 386 missed calls. 19 times Lucas picked up. Many calls lasted barely more than 10 seconds, with the familiar excuse: "I'm at the hospital. I'll call back later." And of course, later never came. When Eleanor began requiring hospitalization for monitoring every 3 months, I kept every document: Medicare bills, test fees, nursing reports, hallway access logs. I knew that in America, especially in disputes involving the elderly, paperwork speaks louder than cries. And I discovered something that kept me silent for hours. The hospital's visitor log stated clearly: Lucas Whitaker, number of visits, 0. Not 1, not 2, not a single time. While I spent every night by Eleanor's side as she thrashed and called our son's name, hoping for a flicker of recognition, Lucas was somewhere out in the world, believing his wife's claim that staying away is healthier. One night, Eleanor woke in the middle of the darkness, held my hand, her voice soft as paper brushing together. "Henry, is he angry with us?" I clenched my teeth to keep from crying. The woman who once stood strong against desert heat now curled like a child afraid of being abandoned. I answered, "No, sweetheart, he's just lost." But deep down, I knew it was beyond the reach of comfort. By the 7th year, Eleanor's condition had worsened to the point she no longer remembered her own birthday. In the rare moments of clarity, she still asked the same question, the one I dreaded most: "Henry, where's our son?" I began scanning every bill, creating a digital folder. Each file is numbered by month. I told no one, not even Lucas. Something urged me to keep everything, as if the future would need it. And just as I sensed, Victoria pushed deeper and deeper. She sent more emails to Lucas, her tone making my skin crawl. "Avoiding contact will help you stabilize. Aging parents create emotional pressure. Distance is healthier." She turned neglect into a therapeutic method, draping a scientific veneer over abandonment. Lucas, exhausted by medicine, believed every word. I once considered calling Lucas, asking why my son, a doctor, let someone else dictate his heart. But seeing Eleanor asleep, her thin hand gripping the blanket, I no longer had the strength. So I kept writing, storing, and collecting each piece of data. 9 years passed like the red water flowing around Sedona after rainfall, silent, slow, but powerful enough to erode stone. And on the day Eleanor died, I closed the notebook. The final page held only one note: Eleanor's last day. Lucas did not come. That night, I sat in the living room, the notebook on my lap. The light fell across pages stained with numbers and dry clinical documents that to me were pieces of a heart broken apart. 9 years, nearly a decade, she waited for something that would never come. And I, the keeper of all of it, knew these records weren't just sad memories. They would become the only thing standing between me and Lucas and Victoria's plan. I closed the notebook, telling myself, if they want to start a game, I won't walk in unarmed. For several weeks after the confrontation at the Red House, I understood Victoria would not stop. She was the type who saw life as a spreadsheet. Any row out of place gets deleted, any missing column gets filled, anyone in the way gets pushed aside. If her target was the $3.4 million house in Sedona, then the only obstacle was me. One afternoon, as the red rocks began to darken, I received a text from Karen, the family attorney who had once worked with Victoria. "Henry, she's preparing guardianship paperwork. Be careful." My chest sank, not from shock, but because the sense of it had been stalking me for a long time. In her office in Phoenix, Victoria opened her laptop, laying out a series of forms: petition for temporary guardianship, doctor's capacity statement, financial oversight request. On the screen appeared the line she had just typed: Henry Whitaker, potential cognitive decline case. Beside her, Lucas sat like a shadow, tired and conflicted. Victoria said, "Write a short report for me. Just describe a few signs of diminished processing, loss of focus, forgetfulness, and slowed responses. Emphasize prolonged grief." Lucas looked up and said quietly, "I've never seen Dad like that." Victoria simply pushed the packet of templates toward her husband. "It doesn't have to be serious, just what you feel. Your father just lost his partner of nearly 40 years. That's enough." Lucas repeated phrases like grief, confusion, and reduced clarity, and then began writing the most baseless assessment of his life, describing his own father as if he were a stranger. After that, to avoid suspicion of bias, Victoria sent the draft to Lauren Pierce, an elder law colleague. In the email, she wrote, "Please review. I believe this case qualifies for temporary guardianship. Father-in-law shows signs of diminished decision capacity." Lauren read it, found it lacking a clinical basis, but still noted, "Need additional medical evaluation and hazard statement. Otherwise okay." Victoria's victorious smile bloomed instantly. However, under Arizona law, applying for temporary guardianship requires 2 independent neurological evaluations, a report from a court-appointed investigator, and medical records proving the proposed ward cannot care for themselves or their assets. Victoria couldn't forge medical papers, so she needed Lucas to sign the capacity concern form for the rest of the process to slide into place. And to make Lucas agree, Victoria didn't use logic. She used psychology. That evening in their Flagstaff apartment, she poured wine and spoke softly like a whisper. "You think you're a good son? Protecting your father from a bad decision is what's good. You're gone at work all the time. You're not there with him. You want him to spiral alone." Lucas sighed. "But guardianship is serious. Dad is still clear-minded." Victoria touched his shoulder. "A man who lost his wife 3 months ago. How clear can he be? You're a doctor. You know that better than anyone." The words were both command and chain. Exhausted by endless shifts, Lucas nodded as if by reflex. The trap closed. That night, I received an email from Mark, the psychiatrist at Mayo Clinic. "Henry, Lucas may be asking for advice on a professional forum. There's a post exactly like your situation." Mark sent a screenshot. The title, "Family Elder with Suspected Cognitive Decline After Spouse's Passing. Need Advice on Legal Options." The content described a man in his 60s, recently widowed, exhibiting behavioral changes, refusal of assistance, and risk of financial mistakes. I read to the last line, "Considering guardianship for safety. Thoughts? No name, no job title, but every word described me as if taken directly from the notebook in my home." I understood. Lucas had written that post, not to seek advice, but to legitimize the path Victoria was steering him onto. In that moment, I saw the full trap. They didn't just want the house. They wanted to strip me of the right to decide my own life. Everything I had recorded for 9 years, logs, bills, visitor records, was no longer the pain of an abandoned husband, but the only armor against their ambition. I sat before the thick leather notebook, looking at the lines etched with daily effort. The truth was here, and I would guard it at all costs. I told myself one sentence, sharp, clear, unwavering. If they want to use the law to break me, I'll use the law to keep my life. The next afternoon, when Sedona was covered in the honey-colored light of the late day, and the red rocks glowed like a sheet of smoldering silk, I drove to Prescott to meet Marion Quinn, Eleanor's confidant of more than 20 years, and also the sharpest family attorney I had ever known. Marion opened the office door as I stepped onto the porch. Her gray hair was neatly pinned, her eyes sharp enough to see through the dust of time clinging to my coat. "Henry, Eleanor would never forgive me if I let you handle this alone," she said, pulling me into the conference room. The oak-paneled room smelled of old paper and ink, reminding me instantly of the cabinet where Eleanor kept her bills and treatment journals. I placed the file on the table, my palms still trembling slightly. Marion hadn't even opened the documents before she said, "I skimmed the message you sent. This isn't a typical family issue. This is a clear combination of elder coercion and asset targeting." She paused, then spoke in a voice firm as a hammer. "Henry, legally, this is elder coercion with financial exploitation. If you let them go any further, the consequences won't be simple." I exhaled slowly and told her about the 9 years I lived alongside Eleanor's Alzheimer's. The sleepless nights when she panicked, the mornings spent coaxing her to eat one small spoon at a time, the stages when Eleanor was still lucid enough to ask, "Henry, where's our son?" And then the times she forgot who she was. I told her every step of Lucas fading away, every repeated call that was met only with curt messages from Victoria, every holiday when I set the table full, hoping my son would drop by for just 10 minutes, but he never came. Marion sat silently, not interrupting, but her eyes tightened as if she were witnessing the entire journey I had taken in the dark. When I finished, Marion opened the file I brought. Logs, bills, care schedules, visitor records from Mayo Clinic, Medicare notes, even photos of Eleanor lying on the green upholstered chair I still kept. Marion reviewed everything, then closed the folder, leaned forward, and said a sentence that made my spine straighten. "If you have 9 years of documentation like this, Lucas and Victoria have no ground to stand on." I looked at her, not fully understanding. Marion continued, "Guardianship only holds when the proposed ward lacks decision-making capacity. You are the opposite. You were the primary caregiver for nearly a decade. The bills, medical appointments, medication receipts, everything proves you've managed things better than anyone." She pushed her chair back, stood, and pulled a large folder board from the cabinet. "But to obliterate Victoria's plan, we need one document no one can twist. A capacity letter." I frowned. "What is that?" Marion explained, each word hitting the table like a tap of wood. "A letter of decision-making capacity from an independent clinical psychiatrist. Not a therapist, not a family doctor. A certified expert in legal evaluations. If you have a capacity letter confirming you are fully competent, their guardianship dies at the door." Then she added, "I'll refer you to Dr. Lawrence Adler in Scottsdale. He's worked in forensic psychiatry for 30 years. An evaluation from him is stronger than anything Victoria can cook up." I sat still for a few seconds, not because I was surprised, but because for the first time I saw a clear way out. Everything I had quietly recorded for 9 years, each missed call, each treatment schedule, each bill, was no longer emotional scar tissue. It became evidence. Marion looked deeply at me and said, "You're not just protecting yourself. You're protecting Eleanor's dignity. If she saw this happening, she would want you to fight to the end." I nodded, my throat tightening. It had been a long time since Eleanor passed that anyone had said something that made me stand straighter, without thinking. "Now let's begin," Marion said, pulling the whiteboard from the wall. "You're going to open a war room. I'll guide you." She placed a marker in my hand. We categorized documents by year, flag key months, separate visitor logs, emails from Victoria, and texts Lucas sent under her instruction. The timeline must be sharp enough that when presented in court, they can't breathe. In the red glow spilling through the window, I lifted the marker and wrote the first line on the board. Year 1, the day Eleanor was diagnosed. Marion stood beside me, nodding with satisfaction. In that moment, I understood. The battle Victoria thought she had already secured would not unfold the way she imagined. And Eleanor, though no longer in this world, had a formidable ally standing with me. That morning, Sedona lay under a pale light, like a thin silk veil, and I walked into the Sedona Memory and Cognitive Center with a single goal: to slam shut the guardianship door Victoria was trying to pry open with every trick she had. Marion had been very clear: to carry out any major transaction, especially the plan to donate $3.4 million to the Alzheimer's Research Fund Eleanor had always wanted, I needed an independent capacity assessment from a physician. Without that document, all Victoria had to do was file a petition, and the court would be forced to order a re-evaluation. But if I obtained it first, their file would be effectively defanged. The doctor in charge of the evaluation that day was Lawrence Adler, the man Marion had mentioned, a tall, lean figure with the clear gaze of someone used to seeing families torn apart by disputes. He led me through a series of tests: verbal fluency, memory recall, pattern recognition, and number sequence processing, then into a long conversation about the 9 years I had spent caring for Eleanor. Each question was gentle enough not to create pressure, but sharp enough to catch any instability if it existed. I answered clearly, without dodging a single point. When we finished, Dr. Adler closed the file, looked at me for a moment, and said, "Mr. Henry, grief is not an illness. It's the response of the one left behind, after a long love. And let me be clear, I don't see any signs of cognitive decline in you." That afternoon, I received the official stamped report: no cognitive impairment, bereavement within normal parameters, fully capable of independent financial and personal decision-making. It was not just a piece of paper. It was a hammer strike straight into Victoria's narrative that I was not competent enough to manage assets. I made 3 copies, one sent to Marion so she could file it into the court's record system as proactive evidence, one kept in the safe, and the last placed on my desk, where every time I saw it, I remembered I was not nearly as weak as Victoria wanted everyone to believe. Marion called as soon as she got the document, her voice taut like a string, but tinged with relief. "Henry, this is weapon A. No matter how many reasons they fabricate, guardianship is blocked from the very first step. They no longer have any legal ground to move even half a step forward." I stood at the window, watching the red rocks blaze in the sunset as if they were breathing, and for the first time in many months, I felt the tide had turned. Victoria didn't know it yet, but the moment she smashed into this wall was coming very soon, and I would be the one steering the game. 3 days after I completed the cognitive assessment, on a morning when the wind swept through Sedona, carrying the smell of hot stone and red dust, I received an unexpected visit from Ethan Morales, the young attorney who had once worked with Eleanor on a community project. Ethan walked in with a tension I rarely saw on him. "Mr. Henry, we need to talk now," he whispered, his eyes darting around as if afraid someone might overhear. When the office door clicked shut, Ethan placed a USB on the table and lowered his voice. "Victoria's firm, Harrison and Hale, is under internal audit for suspected phishing. The security system flagged a chain of suspicious emails, and hers is in that batch." I felt my heartbeat slow, not in fear, but in the familiar instinct that rises in a man who spent 9 years surviving on nothing but intuition against subtle blows. Ethan opened his laptop, plugged in the USB, and pulled up a PDF. Across the screen were internal emails, the subject lines revealing words that made my spine tighten, even though I had prepared myself for this. "We may secure Henry's house within Q1. Directly below, from Victoria to her trusted legal group, Lucas will serve as medical justification once the petition is ready." My throat tightened when I reached the 3rd line, written with the coldness of someone who treats family as corporate assets. 3.4M will shift into family control once guardianship is established. Ethan stayed silent while I read. There was no hesitation in those emails. Not a single word softened. Every sentence landed like a drill, bit hitting bedrock, laying bare their entire blueprint. Seize the house in Q1. Use Lucas as medical leverage. Then funnel the lifetime of assets I built into family, control, and in Victoria's definition of family, neither Eleanor nor I existed, only her and Lucas. I closed the laptop and exhaled, the sound heavy like lifting a stone from my chest, yet my face remained calm enough that Ethan finally asked, "You're not angry?" I looked at him and answered slowly and clearly, "What's the point of anger? Now isn't the time." Ethan went on. During the malware audit, IT spotted Victoria's emails containing sensitive terms tied to guardianship and assets. They escalated it to the department head, and because Ethan had once worked with Eleanor, someone had anonymously passed the leaked file to him for ethical reasons. The evidence was so strong that even a fraction of it in court would leave Victoria with no room to deny anything. I nodded, partly in gratitude and partly in acknowledgement that fate seemed to be aligning on my side. But inside me there was no satisfaction, none of the triumph Victoria might expect I would show. I saw only one thing clearly. This was Weapon B, the second spear after the capacity letter, ready to punch straight through the facade she had built for years. I stood and placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "Thank you. From here, let me handle it." He left looking unsettled, unable to understand why I wasn't shaken or furious. But I knew exactly why. Someone who spent 9 years caring for Eleanor, alone, facing her illness, her terrified eyes as she slowly forgot my face, and the quiet abandonment of a son, does not tremble at an email about someone trying to steal a house. I placed the USB in the safe, locked it, then stood in my office looking out at the red Sedona cliffs, washed in the color of sunset. In that light, everything sharpened like a mirror. They had begun their assault, but I was the one who had prepared the battlefield, and I would not fight the way they expected. That afternoon, the Sedona sky burned a deep orange, as if the rocks themselves were breathing, and I stood behind the cypress trees at the end of the road, watching Lucas's charcoal SUV slowly stop at my gate. Before the engine even shut off, Victoria stepped out first. Quick, sharp movements, carrying the energy of someone convinced victory was already hers. Beside them was a woman in a cream suit wearing the badge of a real estate firm in Phoenix. A realtor. Exactly as I expected. But what Victoria didn't account for was that Sedona afternoons always drew neighbors to their porches, watering plants, walking dogs, or simply watching the rocks change color. They saw everything. Lucas with a stack of documents, Victoria pointing around the yard like she was appraising someone else's property, and they began gathering in small clusters. Wind from the canyon carried their murmurs. I heard Victoria clearly, loud enough for neighbors 2 houses away. "He's slipping fast. If we don't lock this down soon, the house will be out of control." I pressed the recorder in my jacket pocket. The realtor glanced around, uncomfortable under the neighborhood's attention, but Victoria acted as if she were leading a corporate briefing. She strode to the window frame, placed her hand on the wood, and told the realtor in a tone half instructive, half assuming ownership, "Just document everything. We want a quick sale once the guardianship petition is signed." Lucas stood beside her, silent, but the way he held the contract told me all I needed to know. Victoria had molded his thoughts so thoroughly, he no longer recognized the edge of his own conscience. Only when they circled the porch for the second time did I step out from the back path, walking slowly but deliberately, so no one mistook me for being caught off guard. The neighbors froze. Some of them had helped me during Eleanor's decline, and they knew exactly what I had carried alone. As I approached, the conversation died instantly. I looked at the realtor first, calm but firm. "What are you doing here?" Before she could answer, Victoria cut in with a sharp, confident sneer. "Henry, we already discussed this. You told Lucas the other day that you were confused, that you weren't clear-headed enough to manage the house. You said you were afraid you'd make a bad decision." I locked eyes with Victoria, unblinking. "I never said that." Victoria shifted tones, feigning gentleness, feigning compassion. "Henry, grief makes you remember wrong. You said you were overwhelmed, and—" I lifted my hand and pressed the button on the second recorder I had just activated. The beep rang out across the yard, loud enough for the neighbors to hear. The realtor's face went pale. Victoria froze, then forced a laugh. "You're recording? This is a family home." "Exactly," I said slowly, each word dropping onto the ground like stones into a canyon. "And because this is my home, I have the right to protect every inch of it." Victoria opened her mouth to gaslight again, but I didn't allow her the breath. I spoke louder, clear enough for everyone on the street to hear. "I'm not selling, not signing, not transferring, and there is no agreement happening here." Lucas stiffened, as if waking from a long sleep Victoria had lulled him into. The realtor stepped back, looking from Victoria to the growing crowd of neighbors, none of whom looked sympathetic. She blinked several times, calculating whether she wanted to be involved in this disaster, then made her decision. I think I'll come back when the family's aligned," she muttered, already retreating toward her car. Some neighbors watched her go, a few shaking their heads, others pressing their lips in disapproval. The realtor fled. Lucas stood frozen, and Victoria, for the first time since her scheme began, lost the smile of someone who believed she had already won. The silence after the realtor drove away struck Victoria harder than any argument. She clenched her jaw, fighting to hold composure in front of the crowd, but her eyes flickered with panic. "Henry," she rasped, "you're making this harder." "No," I said instantly. "I'm refusing to let anyone erase Eleanor from this house." Lucas inhaled sharply, but said nothing. Victoria tugged at his sleeve, signaling they should leave before the humiliation deepened. As they walked toward the gate, I stayed exactly where I was. No chasing, no shouting. I let them swallow the embarrassment they created for themselves in front of an entire Sedona street that rarely saw drama, but saw this one clearly. When the SUV started and disappeared around the bend, I finally shut off both recorders and returned to the gate. The red rocks were still glowing beautifully, but inside me, something had shifted. They were no longer attacking from the shadows, and I had just shown the whole neighborhood exactly who held the keys to this battle. The morning I decided not to wait any longer, Sedona had a strange kind of light. The sky was so clear the red rocks appeared etched in every grain, and the brick roof of my house reflected a warm brown, like a memory being folded away with care. I brewed a pot of coffee, stood on the porch surveying the land Eleanor and I had tended for nearly 3 decades, then picked up my phone to call Marion. "It's time," I said, without circling around it. There was a brief silence on the other end, then her steady voice. "Are you ready to give Eleanor exactly what she wanted?" I nodded, knowing she couldn't see it. If Eleanor's suffering can make someone else's path lighter, then let it have real meaning. That afternoon, I sat in Marion's office in Prescott, across from the representative of the Red Rock Alzheimer's Center, a middle-aged woman named Abigail, her eyes carrying the soft fatigue of someone who has witnessed too many families break under the same disease that took my wife. We didn't start with sentimental talk. Marion started with law. She spread the documents across the table, her voice even and firm. "First, we need an independent appraisal. Not the number Lucas tossed around in an email, not some online listing price, but a certified state appraisal. No one is going to call this house 3.4M and use that number to divide it however they want." Abigail nodded, taking careful notes. A week later, the appraiser came to Sedona, measuring every foot, photographing every corner, checking the land history, Even calculating the premium value of the Red Rock Vista, tourists always stopped their cars to photograph. When the report came in, the final figure sat between my expectation and Victoria's boast. Roughly $3.4 million, give or take, enough for Red Rock to open an entire new research wing. Marion held the appraisal, slid it into a dark blue folder. This is the official benchmark. From now on, anyone saying otherwise is telling their own story. The next step was the transfer paperwork. Marion recommended using a neutral title company in Flagstaff to avoid any accusations of conflict of interest. Everything will go through a 30-day escrow, she explained. Funds move only when the title is absolutely clear and the donation agreement has full approval from the Red Rock Board. There won't be a single gap for Victoria to squeeze into. I read every line in the contract. The property transferred directly to the Red Rock Alzheimer's Center, passing through no individual in the family. The entire appraised value forming the Eleanor Whitaker Research Fund, and a special clause Marion drafted herself. I retained the right to stay in the house for up to 1 year after closing, a limited life estate of sorts, so no one could accuse me of having made a rash decision or being pushed out. Everything was written in the dry language of law, but beneath it I felt the truth. This was the only way to pull the house out of the hands of those who wanted to turn it into a trophy. When we reached the last section, Marion slid another document toward me, the capacity letter from Dr. Adler. She clipped it into the package with a thick metal fastener. We attached this to the entire transfer file. That means anyone claiming Mr. Henry wasn't competent when he signed will have to go through the signature and seal of a forensic psychiatrist. No judge will ignore that. I looked at the bold words, "no cognitive impairment," on the page and felt something difficult to name rising in me. Relief, sorrow, and the sensation of finally standing straight after being bent by someone else's narrative for too long. Abigail, the Red Rock representative, spoke softly. "Mr. Henry, if this is too heavy, we can wait." I shook my head. "No, I spent 9 years with Eleanor in the dark. I know the cost of hesitation. If I delay, Victoria won't just try to take the house. She'll use our pain to move herself forward." Marion looked at me, her aging eyes bright. "You're certain? Once you sign, this house no longer carries your name." I turned to the window, looking at the yard where Eleanor used to set up her folding chair to read on cool afternoons. What echoed in my mind wasn't the house, it was her voice, once whispered from a hospital bed. "Henry, if what I've gone through can help someone suffer less, then my life wasn't wasted." I turned back, speaking slowly and firmly. Eleanor wanted her pain to matter. The only way is to use this house. Then I picked up the pen and signed every page, not rushed, not trembling. Each signature wasn't a farewell to brick and timber, but a promise to finish what Eleanor never had the chance to complete. When the final initial was down, Marion gathered the documents, the independent appraisal, the transfer agreement, the capacity letter, the 30-day escrow clause. She tapped the thick stack lightly. "This is Weapon C. Henry, from now on, if Victoria tries to claim you're incompetent, we show this. And if she wants the house, she'll have to go through Red Rock, its board, and the court stamp. She's not long-armed enough for that." Driving back to Sedona, the sun dipped behind the rock faces, painting the sky the reddish purple Eleanor always loved. I looked at the house from afar, the tiled roof, the wooden porch, the window frame where we had taped Christmas cards for decades, and I knew the day was coming when I would give it to someone else. Strangely, I didn't feel loss. Instead, I felt as though I had pulled it out of the grasp of people who treated family as numbers in an email. Victoria believed she was building an elegant plan. She had no idea the house she targeted had been turned into a different kind of weapon, no longer a prize to be taken, but a silent, razor-sharp indictment of her own greed. And that was the kind of revenge Eleanor if she were still here, would likely smile at. A revenge that creates light for someone lost in the same darkness we once walked through. The morning Red Rock released the press announcement. Sedona seemed a shade brighter, even though a thin layer of clouds drifted down from the Mogollon rim. My phone buzzed nonstop, but I calmly brewed a pot of mint tea and sat on the porch, reading every word of the announcement. Red Rock Alzheimer's Center is honored to announce, this Friday at the Scottsdale Convention Hall, we will introduce a major donor, along with a special address on a 9-year journey of caregiving for a loved one with Alzheimer's. One single line, and it was enough to send ripples through both the medical network and the legal community of Arizona. Not even an hour passed before my phone rang, Victoria's name flashing on the screen like a warning light. I answered, keeping my voice even. Hello? On the other end was frantic breathing laced with panic. Henry, what is happening? Why is Red Rock saying there's a major donor? What are you doing? I let a few seconds of silence settle before replying simply, I'll see you Friday at the Scottsdale Convention Hall. I heard the choke in her throat, the attempt to soften her voice while fear cracked beneath it. Henry, don't make this difficult. Do you know how this affects Lucas? I gave a quiet laugh, the kind she would never understand. Are you worried for Lucas or for yourself? I hung up before she could find another excuse. That afternoon, an email from Flagstaff Medical Center arrived in my inbox. All neurology and geriatric staff are honored to attend the Red Rock Gala. They wanted to honor Eleanor, once their most severe patient, and the one who helped inspire their new care model. What caught my attention more was the letter attached. We heard attorney Marion Quinn will also speak on elder coercion. Not long after, Marion called. Harrison and Hale, Victoria's firm, also received an invitation they have to attend. Red Rock's one of their long-standing legal partners. Do you understand what that means? I answered. I do. This is no longer a living room dispute. That evening, a few old friends in Phoenix texted, Henry, what are you about to reveal? Everyone's saying the event will include a public statement. I didn't explain. I didn't need to, because sometimes silence at the right moment is stronger than any justification. I stood in front of Eleanor's room, looking at the photo of her smiling, the smile of someone who knew justice needs bright lights, a wide stage, and enough witnesses so the guilty can't slip away. The gala at Scottsdale Convention Hall would gather hundreds of doctors, donors, journalists, and people who had seen Eleanor fight until her last breath. And because Red Rock sent a major donor recognition notice to all premium clients, the guest list would include the entire elder law team from Harrison and Hale, including the ones Victoria had quietly asked to review. The guardianship file about me. I closed Eleanor's door, evening light spilling across the long hallway, and told myself, it's time to show them the truth under the lights. This gala would not just be a donation announcement, it would be a velvet indictment, revealing who cared, who abandoned, who schemed, and who chose decency. And what confirmed I was on the right path, Victoria would be sitting in the front row, right before the MC stepped onto the stage while people were still gathered around cocktail tables. Victoria lifted her glass, her voice loud enough for half the ballroom to hear. He's confused, just waiting for the day he signs the house over to us. A few people chuckled, assuming it was some harmless family banter. I simply stood still, tightening my grip on the microphone, letting her words settle into the minds of everyone present. 10 minutes later, when the MC took the stage and announced, Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we honor Mr. Henry Whitaker, the room erupted in applause. Victoria snapped around, her eyes widening as if she were staring at a verdict suspended in midair. I walked up to the podium, standing before a 2-story LED screen, microphone in hand. I'm here, I said, not to tell my story, but to speak about what Eleanor endured for 9 years. And then I launched Weapon A. The screen behind me lit up with a long log. Visitor log, Flagstaff Medical Center, Alzheimer Unit. The first line appeared in bold clarity. Lucas Whitaker, visits, 0. The entire room gasped. A physician in the front row stood abruptly. Dr. Whitaker, is this true? Lucas went pale. At that moment, neighbors from Sedona, medical colleagues, doctors, nurses, everyone who had heard him brag about visiting his mother often, now saw the truth. Victoria tried to angle herself to block him, but the ballroom lights were too bright for anyone to hide in a shadow. I moved to weapon B. The screen shifted to a chain of emails, names redacted per Marion's instructions. Only the content remained. We may secure Henry's house within Q1. Lucas will serve as medical justification. 3.4M will shift into family control once guardianship is established. A legal colleague of Victoria's stood up, outrage shaking her voice. This violates every ethics rule. Phones, cameras, recorders shot into the air. A wave of murmurs surged through the 600-person hall. Victoria lunged forward a half step, shouting into the lights. It's all lies. He's not competent. He's mentally incompetent. And that was the moment I released Weapon C. I reached into my pocket, pulled out the recorder, the same device that captured her words on my front lawn, and pressed play. Victoria's voice rang out across the entire hall. He's slipping fast. Guardianship is the only way. We secure the house first. 3 sentences, 3 blades. Each word landed like metal hitting cold stone. The room fell into absolute silence. Not shock, but the kind of silence that comes when truth is so stark it leaves no room to look away. Victoria trembled, turning to Lucas. Say something. Tell them it's fake. But Lucas couldn't. He collapsed into his chair, head in his hands, whatever remained of his confidence crushed under the weight of hundreds of eyes. When Victoria stammered again, he's not competent to sign anything, I pulled a red-stamped document from Marion's case and held it high for all to see. Capacity letter, Sedona Memory and Cognitive Center. No cognitive impairment. Every gaze in the hall swung to Victoria. No one moved, no one intervened. Not a single colleague stepped forward to defend her. The woman who had puppeteered Lucas, who believed she could seize my home through a fabricated guardianship, now stood in the brightest spotlight in Scottsdale, exposed, stripped of the mask she'd worn for years. A doctor in the second row murmured loud enough for the mic to catch, "This isn't an ethics issue. This is elder abuse." A small cluster of Victoria's co-workers, people who had laughed with her in the hallway hours earlier, took half a step away, careful not to stand beside her as the cameras turned. I scanned the room and delivered the final line. Eleanor doesn't need anyone to defend her tonight. The truth has done that already. Then I walked off the stage. No music, no applause. Only a silence so deep I could hear Victoria's choke sobs, and Lucas's head bowed over the table, unable to lift his eyes beneath the judgment of 600 witnesses. It wasn't merely humiliation. It was a public verdict, delivered before the very community they once believed would side with them. The morning after the gala, Scottsdale was still damp with mist, but Arizona's medical network had erupted like a hornet's nest struck hard. By 6 a.m., the Hospital Ethics Board of Flagstaff Medical Center had already issued a notice temporarily suspending Lucas Whitaker, the name once considered the pride of the neurology department, to reassess conduct related to elder coercion and conflict of interest. Lucas received the email just as he woke up on the couch of his dim apartment, eyes red from a sleepless night, the words in the center of the message cut like a blade. Temporary suspension pending review. At the same time in Phoenix, Harrison and Hale called an emergency meeting. Victoria walked into the conference room with a blank stare, but the cold silence of the partners said everything. The head of elder law pushed a laptop toward her. "We're opening an official investigation. Until matters are clarified, you are to step away from your position." Victoria tried to defend herself, but no one responded, partly because the clips from the gala had already spread online, partly because the email chain IT uncovered had nearly obliterated any confidence left in her. Around 9 a.m., the real storm hit the internet. The video showing the visitor log, the emails, and the recording of Victoria. Someone uploaded it to TikTok with the caption, "Daughter-in-law attempts to seize father-in-law's 3.4M house. Exposed live at gala." In less than 2 hours, the video reached 3 million views. The comments section was a wildfire. My hands were shaking watching this. I can't believe someone could do this. This father is the definition of patience. Guardianship abuse is real. Each comment another slap across the mask Victoria had worn for years. In Sedona, where everyone knew Eleanor's Alzheimer's battle, the community buzzed nonstop. At Red Canyon Brew, an older man said loudly across the room, "I know Henry cared for Eleanor every single day, and those two disappeared for 9 years." Someone else added, "Good grief," and they still tried to take his house. The murmurs spread faster than the wind across the red cliffs. By noon, Harrison and Hale issued a second notice to Victoria. Administrative leave of absence effective immediately. No one checked on her, no one defended her, not even the colleagues she thought loyal. Meanwhile, Lucas sat curled in the dark of his apartment, surrounded by unopened takeout boxes and shirts draped over chairs. His phone lit up again and again with messages. Friends asking what happened, colleagues asking for confirmation, the hospital requesting a written statement. But Lucas couldn't bring himself to open a single one. He just stared at the photo of his mother, Eleanor, the one I sent him 5 years ago, his hands trembling as though realizing for the first time how completely he had abandoned the woman who had loved him. That afternoon, I drove back to Sedona. The house, already quiet, felt even emptier after days of preparing transfer, documents. The late sunlight spilled into the living room, reflecting off the wooden wall where Eleanor once hung our wedding photos. On the table, I placed her silver ring, the single item I kept, the one thing I didn't donate to Red Rock. That small, simple ring glowed under the sunset in a way that tightened my throat. I sat down, hands interlocked, staring at the room that no longer held Eleanor's warmth, and I realized, though I had won the public battle yesterday, today was still a day of loss. But one truth was clear. The collapse of Victoria and Lucas was the price they created for themselves, not for me. And Eleanor's ring lay there as a reminder that justice sometimes arrives last, but when it does, it sweeps away every lie without ever needing to raise its voice. I closed my eyes, listening to the wind brushing the red rocks outside, a silence both Eleanor and I had long deserved after 9 years of standing alone in the dark. 6 months after the gala night, Arizona entered its hottest stretch of summer, yet the courtyard of the Red Rock Alzheimer's Center was glowing in a different way. Silver-blue ribbons lined the hallways. The sign, Eleanor Whitaker Research Wing, hung proudly at the entrance, and dozens of families with loved ones battling Alzheimer's gathered for the opening of the new treatment wing. I stood at the edge of the courtyard, not wanting to step into the stream of gratitude speeches, simply watching the nurses and researchers introduce each room. No one knew I was the donor behind the wing. I chose to stand in the corner, as if seeing Eleanor's name lit up was enough. Near the end of the ceremony, I saw Lucas standing by the edge of the parking lot, holding a thin folder. His hair was a bit longer, eyes hollowed from lack of sleep, but the panic from gala night was gone. He hesitated for a long time before approaching me. "Dad," his voice was so soft the McDowell winds almost carried it away. "I'm applying to volunteer here. They said I can help patients, do support work. Anything that doesn't involve my license." I looked at him, noticing how tightly he was squeezing the folder. "You're doing this to redeem yourself?" I asked, neither harsh nor gentle. Lucas shook his head immediately, his gaze fixed on his mother's name on the sign. "No, I'm doing it for Mom. I left her alone for too long. I can't fix that in a day or a week, but I want to start here." I let a few seconds pass, letting silence measure sincerity. Then I spoke slowly, each word dropping onto the hot ground like a weight. Then do it. But remember, you're doing this for Eleanor, not for me. Don't use it to ask for forgiveness. Forgiveness takes time to prove. Lucas nodded. No arguments, no excuses, no blame on circumstances or on Victoria. Just the nod of someone who knows the road back to being a son is long. As for Victoria, news of her had spread across the legal field for months. Harrison and Hale's internal investigation concluded she had severely violated professional ethics. The Bar Association issued a license suspension for review. And just 3 weeks before the opening of the Eleanor wing, she left Arizona to avoid the press, carrying a career fractured beyond easy repair. I felt no joy, no resentment, just the certainty that consequences had arrived exactly where they belonged. After the ceremony, I returned to Sedona, but didn't stay in the big house anymore. Red Rock needed immediate access, and I'd moved into a small apartment near downtown. The space was simple: an old armchair, a bookshelf, a window facing the red rocks. Enough. In the evenings, I brewed tea, sat by the window, and watched the last light turn the town gold, feeling a strange lightness, as if I had finally set down a burden I'd carried for years. Lucas dropped by occasionally after his shifts at Red Rock, not saying much, just placing a paper bag of bread or fruit on the table, sitting quietly for a minute before leaving. No more apologies, no explanations, just the quiet work of someone trying to change, and that silence was easier to accept than any polished promise. One clear night, when I turned off the lights and the apartment sank into a gentle stillness, I finally understood something I hadn't been able to name for a year. Justice isn't a shout or a loud act of revenge or someone on their knees begging. Justice, as I know it now, is the moment truth stands fully in the light, undeniable, and the ones who were wrong have nowhere left to hide. Eleanor somewhere would probably smile knowing every circle has closed, the house used for its rightful purpose, the innocent finding peace again, the guilty paying their price, and the son given a chance to return by a path he must walk himself. As for me, I'm simply an old man living in a small room facing the red rocks, peaceful enough to hear the wind without feeling heaviness anymore. When I walked out of the Red Rock Alzheimer wing that afternoon, I realized justice isn't an explosion. It's the moment I stood straight, brought truth into the light, and watched the people who thought they were clever be swallowed by their own schemes. I didn't take revenge on anyone. I simply returned to Eleanor what she deserved, and returned to myself the peace they once tried to steal. If this story reminds you of something in your own life, leave a single dot, so I know you still believe truth, even when late, always finds its way home. And if you want to hear more stories of justice like this, give me a subscription. I'm truly grateful. Goodbye, and I'll see you in the next videos.